Have you ever had a conversation with someone and felt like they weren't listening? Like maybe they didn't even care about what you had to say? Not so long ago, life was a bit like that for women in Canada. They weren't allowed to vote. And if they spoke out and voiced their opinions, they could even be sent to jail. It was a time when women had more fear and less freedom, more rules and fewer rights. But 5 courageous Albertan women came together and changed it all. How, you might ask? Over a cup of tea. That's right, a cup of tea. But more on that in a minute. Almost 100 years ago, Emily Murphy, Irene Parlby, Nellie McClung, Louise McKinney, and Henrietta Muir Edwards were fed up with the way things were. Emily Murphy was the first female magistrate in Canada and wanted to be appointed to the Senate. But since she was a woman, she wasn't eligible. The law at the time said it was a position for persons, a word which somehow didn't include women. The women who would become known as the Famous Five set out to change that. But since women were strongly discouraged from getting together and talking about politics, the Famous Five set up what they called pink teas. The name was a great disguise. People assumed that they were just having dainty tea parties, but in reality, they were planning their strategy to move forward gender equality in Canada. All the planning and work that occurred during the pink teas led to the Famous Five's first petition to the Supreme Court of Canada. It was not to be that easy. Their petition was rejected. But they weren't giving up. They decided to approach the highest possible court authority at the time, the Privy Council of England. And on October 18th, 1929, an amazing thing happened. The Famous Five's petition led to the ruling that women were included as persons under law. These 5 courageous women changed the course of history in Canada and the Commonwealth and paved the way for women to be considered equal in all aspects of life. Generations later, their actions continue to inspire Canadian women to be ambitious, adventurous, and famous. Today, the Famous Five Foundation works to create a society where every voice is heard, valued, and has the power to challenge and conquer injustice.
Thank you, Critical Mass. Thank you, Famous Five, for your pink teas and your leadership on suffrage. And welcome. Welcome to yet another Famous Five Friday, a special day when women have extra powers and see other opportunities. We're very pleased you've joined us for this national conversation. And I thank you for making time in your busy day, particularly a day filled with interest and anticipation regarding the results of the American elections. Thank you for making time to be with us. I thank you on behalf of the Famous Five Board, and in particular on behalf of the Director of Events for Prix de Coulard. I would now like us to take a moment for our land acknowledgement, because for thousands and thousands of years, our sisters, the Indigenous sisters and brothers, have taken care of this land we call Canada. And we want them to continue to do so and be part of Canada. Because as we sing in our anthem, true patriot love in all of us command. So Canada needs all of us, and there are opportunities for all of us. Today, we're going to have a special conversation with 2 amazing young female leaders. They're involved in journalism, and it's a timely topic, of course, but it's not a new topic because in the early 1900s, both Emily Murphy, the first female judge in the British Empire, and Nellie McClung, who was largely successful in getting the breakthrough and getting suffrage for women, helped establish Canadian women's press clubs all across Canada. They wanted women not only to be assistants to the journalists, as they were then, but to be the journalists and to be the managers of the media and to be the owners of the media. So bit by bit, this change is happening. And one of the things that has been wonderful for us over the years is to have partnerships. And today we reestablish informally a partnership with the Girl Guides of Canada, a wonderful training for women to be leaders. and you will meet two young women asking probing, thoughtful questions of our two journalists later in the conversation. As well, the Girl Guides were partners with us when we toured the miniature, the maquette of the monument across Canada to all the provincial legislatures. So we're grateful that they're with us today again. And I also want to say thanks to our special sponsor, that's Enbridge. Enbridge has been sponsoring the Enbridge Famous 5 leadership lunches for more than 16 years. These are lunches that have occurred in Calgary, in Ottawa, Sarnia, Fort McMurray, and Edmonton. And today we're joined by a woman who is in charge of community investment for Enbridge, and on an auspicious day because Enbridge yesterday released their goals for diversity and inclusivity, both for their board and for their management and for the general employee population. They're going to be more devoted in terms of recruiting diversity and being inclusive. And one of the people that brought Enbridge to this successful conclusion is the manager of community and community investments, and that's Gina Jordan. It's now my pleasure to turn the program over to Gina to introduce our two special guests and also to bring greetings on behalf of Enbridge. Gina, over to you, and thank you.
Thank you. I'm honored to be here today on behalf of Enbridge to introduce the fourth speaker in our virtual Pink Tea conversations. We've been a proud supporter of the Famous 5 Foundation for nearly 20 years, and we wholeheartedly support the Foundation's vision to champion the development and recognition of Canadian female leaders. And we share this goal within Enbridge, and we continue to work on our commitment to diversity and inclusion and to build an inclusive environment of talent that represents the communities in which we operate. I want to thank the Foundation for continuing to offer us the opportunity to connect with and learn from outstanding female leaders. Technology has really become our friend during these challenging times, and media has kept us engaged and informed on the current issues, which have largely included politics. Jennifer Hollett, a leader in tech, media, and politics, knows this all very well. Jennifer is the executive director of the Walrus, an award-winning Canadian source of independent, fact-based journalism. Prior to joining the Walrus, Jennifer was the head of news and government at Twitter Canada. After earning a degree in journalism from Concordia, Jennifer worked for CBC, CTV, and MuchMusic. She then completed a master's in public administration from Harvard, where she co-founded and developed the Super Pac App, which debuted at #1 in its category and helps to make political TV ads more transparent. But Jennifer's interest in politics is not just from the sidelines. She has been a candidate in both municipal and federal elections. She ran as the NDP candidate in 2015 in Toronto's University Rosedale constituency and as a city councillor in 2018. Jennifer believes in the power of conversation to bring a large country like ours just a little bit closer. And today's conversation will be led by business journalist Tara Weber. Tara Weber became BNN Bloomberg's Western Canadian Correspondent in 2015 after a decade of award-winning work across the country. She is now based in Calgary, where she reports on the energy industry and any other issues of interest to Western Canadians. Tara has degrees in English Literature and Journalism and is currently completing an MBA in Global Energy Management and Sustainable Development. Tara is active in our community and currently sits on the board of the Kirby Centre, which serves the needs of Calgary's seniors. Jennifer and Tara are eager to start our conversation, and I'm excited to learn from both of them. On behalf of Enbridge, enjoy.
Thank you, Gina. That was wonderful. And thank you all who are here today. Welcome. I have to admit, I'm personally very excited to talk with Jennifer today because Jennifer, I have to tell you, I remember you on MuchMusic, and I was also a very young reporter in Toronto when you were first running for politics. So of course, we should start with politics right away because of course, we're still awaiting the results of that hotly contested US election. And I guess One of my
We're all like this, right?
yeah, exactly. One of the big questions I think is, how has the role of a politician changed? I mean, it used to be so different than what it is today. What's your perspective on that?
Yeah, so that to me is what's really exciting about the time that we're in. Traditionally and systemically, the idea of who gets to be a politician was someone who is a man, white, rich, well-connected. When really politicians work for us and need to represent their communities and ultimately at a national level, the country. So it's always exciting to see a diversity of people stepping forward to run for office. That's only part of it. You know, the next step is getting them elected. But I think there's a lot of new energy, and it's coming from a frustration that people have. I know when I first expressed interest in politics, there were a lot of people who were like, why, why you want to be a part of that? Like, it's boring, it's horrible, it's corrupt. But it's for exactly those reasons. It doesn't have to be that way.
What really made you want to jump into the political sphere as a young female?
Yeah, so for me, when I was working as a MuchMusic VJ, I was given a great assignment, which was to cover the 2004 federal election and to do it with young people. So often politicians are speaking to young people, or at young people, but to really, cover the election and the issues that were most important to young people. And back in the early 2000s, that was the environment. It was education. It's some of the issues that we're still trying to sort out. But often young people aren't being courted because they're not a guaranteed vote in terms of turnout. So I had the opportunity to interview all the party leaders. We actually gave every party leader a half an hour commercial free on MuchMusic, and only 2 took us up on the special. It was Jim Harris of the Green Party and Jack Layton of the NDP. And I was particularly moved by Jack's approach to politics. Anyways, it led to a conversation with one of my closest friends, Sarah Lesniewski, and we're kind of saying, man, like, if only politics was better, like if only like the candidates were more dynamic. And then we kind of looked at each other like, so I guess we should do something about this, right? Like how does that happen? You can't just wish it to be. And it started as a very casual conversation, actually on a swing set, and then me later running for office and Sarah working side by side as a leader on our campaign. So I wanted to create that change that I wasn't seeing. I wanted there to be an excitement, and I wanted more people to be able to see themselves in a better, newer, different type of politics.
I love that conversation happened on a swing set.
Oh yeah, we were on a swing set in our hometown of St. Catharines getting ice cream. And it was just kind of often, actually, when you're talking about the world, in conversation with friends or families, you do get to that point of like, oh, like, why is it this way? And like, if only someone would do something. And, someone is us, right? Like, so if you're ever in one of those conversations, like, ask yourself, like, hey, can you be a part of that change that you want?
What did you hear from other young women when you were campaigning? Were they surprised to see you and hear from you?
Yeah, I think a lot of people were surprised because I was a MuchMusic VJ that someone would go from, MuchMusic to politics. But to me, that makes complete sense. So aside from covering the election while I was at MuchMusic, it was actually music that got me into politics and social issues. It was growing up and listening to punk rock and indie rock and hip hop, right? And that's what music and art does, is it makes sense and asks questions of the world around us. So to me, it's actually linked. But I think at a larger level, people associate music and pop culture as like cool and vibrant, and politics is like old and boring and broken. So I think it definitely surprised a lot of people, but I really wanted to make sure that we built community in our campaign, and that it was fun and inviting, and it really captured the diversity that I wanted to bring into politics, hopefully government. And that to me, it was the details. And my campaign manager, Rona Santos, who's now a city councillor in Brampton, Ontario, she's a single mom, and we would have like a spot in our campaign office for kids, because her kid was always hanging out at the office, but also for other kids coming in with coloring books and crafts, so they know, like, hey, kids are welcome in this campaign office. And we also made sure that people who had never worked on an election campaign, that they knew there were, no stupid questions, right? Like that you didn't have to have the right words and language. And actually the best thing you can do at the door is to say, I'm new to politics. I'm really inspired by this campaign. Like that's good. I think people feel like, oh, I don't know everything. Like and it's, well, you don't have to, right? Like, come on board, right? You have the right to vote. And even if you don't, you have the right to volunteer in campaign. This belongs to all of us.
We're on a really interesting precipice right now where we may very well see our first female VP in the US. We have some other really interesting female leaders around the world, but at the same time, we know that female politicians in particular receive a lot more vitriol. It's a lot more difficult for them. What can we do you think, as Canadians, to make it so that there's more good female politicians who see themselves in those roles?
Yeah, so it's so tough. I mean, one of the things that, like, every woman who's run for office or even been in public life has faced, because I face this not only in politics but also when I was working TV, is the beauty myth. So this like constant commentary on how you look. As a politician, as a candidate, you're knocking on doors and asking for votes, and you hand over a flyer with your face, right? And then you say, will you take a sign with my face? And then people have all these opinions on your face. Like, people would say to me, like, oh, you look better in person, or you look better on the flyer, or you're wearing too much makeup, but not enough, or like, are you single? I even had one man give to a member of our team a spray tan. He thought I was too fair skinned, that I should have a spray. I mean, like, the commentary on one's body, and men don't have to navigate that in the same way. Also, the hate and abuse that women face on social media, especially racialized women, LGBTQ2+ women. There's the intersectionality of religion, of having a disability. Like, these are all things that make it more difficult. And what I also see, and this is kind of like tapping into my work at Twitter, is why people, right, are pushing back and harassing and abusing women. It's to silence them, right? It's to get them off of social media. It's to get them out of politics. So we need to call it out when it happens. I think we need to call the police when it's a violation of the law. I think we have to take it as seriously as it is. But I also think we have to, like, highlight what's happening, because I think we are all in the patriarchy here. So sometimes I don't even know if people are realizing that they're doing it. So, for example, on election day for me in 2015, when you're a candidate, you're out there trying to get out the vote. I mean, we saw that in the US on Tuesday, right? Like, the efforts people do to make sure that if you want to vote, that you can vote. And I remember someone kind of saying to me, like, good on you for running. And it just felt like she was treating me like a little girl, like, good, and I just thought, would she treat a man who is 40 years old the same way? Like why am I being treated so differently? So there's a lot of progress to be made, and ultimately at the systemic level, but we are all part of that system.
Yeah, besides the beauty myth you're talking about, I think we also deal with a bit of imposter syndrome in a disproportionate way as well. Do you think enough women see themselves as leaders?
Yeah, so I read an article in The Guardian about, like, the myth of the imposter syndrome, and I've really connected with it. So I know that women definitely feel like, this is not a space I belong in, or, uncomfortable, they question themselves. But that's actually a systemic failure, right? It's not on the individual, that's like a system failing you, right? So we know with the history of the famous five and beyond, that this system wasn't built for most of us, right? And so that's what we're up against. So when you feel that way, it's not on you, right? It's like the system was designed to keep you out. So it's going to be hard, and you're going to feel excluded and out of place. And that's where I think it's really important that we have the support systems, but we have to really come back to, like, this is the design, right? And that's what we have to fix. I think it's less on the individual. We have to support the individual, right? And unpack it. But ultimately there's a larger force at play.
Yeah, and I guess the individual needs to recognize that it's happening too. So
yeah, sure. Yeah, absolutely. Because you might feel it and not know what it is, right?
Yeah. So going back to social media a little bit, I know you've worked in the tech realm for quite a bit as well. Do you remember when you first became excited about the potential of computers, the digital world? Because I'm assuming you and I were very close to the same age, MySpace and MSN Messenger, but things have changed a big way.
It's so funny. It makes me think of ICQ and like all those moments in tech history. So for me, my earliest memory would be grade 3, and our public school had a computer room, and I was asked to turn on all the computers. Like, we need a volunteer. Will you? And that was really exciting to me, that I could just turn on all these computers. And the computers back then didn't do much, right? But I knew it was the future, right? I knew that this was like something that was really going to change things. And we had a Commodore VIC-20 at one point in our home. Again, it didn't really do anything. I think it had we had one video game cartridge, and it was like a very basic, boring game. But it was like, this is not a typewriter. I grew up taking keyboarding classes. It's like, wow, like this is different. This is exciting. And by the time I got to university in 1994, and for the younger people on the call, I mean, you're going to laugh, but I could get an email address, right? You could get an email address to the universities. By the time I graduated university in 97, graphics were being introduced on the internet. I feel so ancient, like, oh, when they introduced the graphics. But to me, seeing this in front of me, like seeing these changes, seeing the evolution of the technology, it's like, I want to be part of that, right? So I've always run towards it. But it really comes back to someone saying, can you turn on all the computers, right? Like come into the room, like set it up. And as a girl to be invited to do that, I mean, a lot of times the boys are asked to do that. So I appreciate that invite very early on.
Well, you've definitely been a part of it. You were hired by Sony Music Canada at a very young age, in your 20s. And soon after, I understand you were developing strategies for their top artists. What gave you the courage to lead at such a young age?
Well, I'm very thankful to those around me who believed in me. So while I was at university studying journalism and communications at Concordia in Montreal, I got a part-time job with Sony Music as a college marketing rep. And then when I was graduating, someone had asked my boss, like, do you know anyone who wants to work in they called it consumer technology back then. And she put my name in. And then I was hired. So it was like really, someone who was my boss, who saw my potential being a champion. And then for, my bosses, because I had a few when I was at Sony, for them, despite my young age, I started when I was 21, seeing how hard I was working, seeing the opportunity for growth, mentoring, supporting me, and not being scared to promote me, even though I was in the early 20s, because I was the youngest manager in the history of Sony Music Canada at the time. Now that's really changed, right? Because we have so many now tech co-founders, right? Who are running, million and billion-dollar companies, but there's still this idea that to be a leader, you have to be like older or have like certain things on your resume. Whereas we should really be looking at like, what can you do, right? Or like, how can you grow in supporting that? So I always try to return that and do it for others, because I think a lot of people work hard. You need those other people around you.
Do you think there still is a bit of a glass ceiling in the tech industry for women, or not?
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. There's a glass ceiling. There's a glass cliff. I remember when I was at Sony, one of our co-op placements, he was studying computer engineering at a University of Waterloo, which, like that's the place. And he said that like so many women drop out between first year and second year, right? So if you're looking just at like engineers and programmers, that kind of comes back to education. So it's like, who's coming into the programs, right? Who's applying, who gets accepted? And then what's that difference between the first and second year? So you're already seeing the barriers, right? Early in education, and then people's experiences in the workplace. So like, there's just so many steps. And I think that's ultimately in so many male dominated industries, they lose really great women because women are having a horrible time, right? And they're facing so many barriers, and they go into other fields where they're going to be happier. So absolutely, it exists. There's definitely more attention on it though, which is good. There's a lot of discussion in education around women and girls in STEM and even STEAM, bringing the arts into STEM, I think, which is part of the work. But this is, again, the systems in place and who gets to be a part of it, and how people fall out.
That's really interesting to me, because I know in my industry, we see women start to pull out and move to other industries, late 30s, early 40s. But to see women at that age and while still in university head out of the tech sector, why do you think it was happening when they were that young?
Yeah, I mean, you bring up a really important point, which is when women start creating their families, and whether that's having children or adopting children, that has a big impact, right, on a woman's career. And yeah, there's so much work that is being done right now around men and parental leave, and really making sure that we value and support employees when they say they would like to start growing their family. But then to your point on when it's happening in the late teens and early 20s, what's happening there? I actually don't have an answer of it's this one thing, but it's definitely spaces where women don't feel welcomed and they don't feel supported. And I think part of it is role modeling, part of it is society, part of it is also support. And I know, for me, I've always been attracted to male-dominated spaces. I love claiming space, in an arena where I'm not supposed to be. I don't think most people feel that way. I think most people are just this is so hard, and I'm clearly not welcome. So I think there's a lot of work to be done, and that's everything from supporting students, supporting parents, but giving people a reason to stay. Right? There's so many reasons for women to leave. What are their reasons to stay?
So if we look at the digital space in totality right now, what would you sum up as happening in that space today? Do you think it's getting better or increasing in usage, that sort of thing?
Yeah, so a few years ago, I was asked to moderate a panel for International Women's Day, and the focus was women in tech. And off the top, I asked the audience, raise your hand if you're currently working in tech. I was trying to get a sense of who was in the audience. And as women were raising their hands, one said, at this point, aren't we all working in tech in some way? And I love that. I just loved it, which is if you're in banking, you're working in tech, right? We're working in tech, we're on Zoom right now. This year, it's everyone is working in tech. If you run a restaurant, you're working in tech now, right? Everyone's working in tech. So I hope that's one of the takeaways of COVID-19 is that the barriers are down, and that's everything from the digital divide, but also just some of the cultural and mental and systemic barriers that exist in terms of what is tech, how do we define it, who's a part of it, who's not. So I think that's the great news. But at the same time, we know that there are still a lot of people who don't have the ability to jump on a Zoom, and that's preventing them to gain access to education, as well as work opportunities. So I think this has been a breakthrough year in time, and we continue that work to make sure that everyone can be a part of this new way that we've been forced to work. But I think that will carry over because there's a lot of accessibility built into it.
One thing that's really interesting as well is as we all increase our usage of social media and technology, we've also started to see more social media giants have to become more accountable. But obviously, that's a huge task. We've seen it get very uncivil. So what can we do as a society to maybe make social media more civil, more productive, and more fair to everyone?
Yeah, so as someone who worked at Twitter as the head of news and government, a lot of it is on the platforms and leadership from them, especially when it comes to policies as well as platform design and their business model. But it also involves, government and policymakers. It involves culture, and social media is basically people. If you listen closely, at the heart of the internet is a conversation. That's really what it is. And I have to say, I've always been amazed. I've been in conversations, on Twitter, in Facebook, where someone says look at this horrible thing that's happening. And I'll say, great, like I just reported it. Can you report it as well? And you just go and report it over there. And then they're just so busy talking about how upset they are about the thing, which I get, but it's like, we also like, there's a reporting tool here. We need to report it so it gets taken down. Like, so can we report it? So I have seen the social media platforms move from being reactive to what's going on in regards to everything from trolling to hate to abuse to proactive. And we're seeing that right now with the US election. I mean, take a look at Trump's Twitter feed and what's being flagged, but also his workaround, how he's taking his press conference and tweeting out videos from that. So these are very complicated issues, and it involves many, many players. I know I've spoken to women who have faced harassment and doxing, and when they call the police, they get a range of different answers. You know, some have told me that a police officer was sent to their home, took it very seriously, but the person who was responsible was in the US and they had no jurisdiction. So all they could do is kind of place a phone call and say, we're on to you. Whereas I've heard other stories of, you know, a police officer sent, but don't really know what to do because it's online, and they didn't feel it was being taken as seriously if the same comments were said out in a public space. So we're under some big cultural shifts right now, and there's a lot of catch up happening for sure.
Yeah, because I think in some ways, by not doing enough, the social media giants allowed the proliferation in many ways of some of these right or left wing conspiracy theory type things to grow. Do you think maybe we took too long to start trying to stomp it out a bit?
Yeah, no, I mean, even just our understanding of disinformation and misinformation has like really grown. So coming on as the executive director at the Walrus, our team does an incredible job with fact checking, and even the idea of fact checking, like what does that mean? So like at the Walrus, it's extremely thorough because we have a print publication, and I mean, they're fact checking the length of a Tic Tac. I mean, the details, you know, they go to, versus we're up against the current US president calling reputable mainstream news outlets fake news, right? And then people in culture, kids teasing each other like that's fake news. So even these terms that we're working with, we have different definitions. So like absolutely, there's a lag, but I also think there's need for more policies and greater education. I mean, I was very thankful to take a media English course in high school, and that was something that was available. But digital media is something that would not just benefit high school students, but all of us. And there are other countries that have been making great progress with digital media and literacy. And I think there's a lot more that we can be doing with that within the education system and also outside. The platforms have a place in this, but I also think that independent groups do as well.
Yeah, I think this is the perfect timing to bring in our first question. This is from the Girl Guides of Canada. Looking forward to it.
Hi, I'm Riley Ringsice, and I go to Bishop Pinkham Junior High. I am in the 72nd Pathfinder unit with Girl Guides. I will be asking you a question in English and French. Comment est-ce que la Walrus et BNN fonctionnent avec l'idée faux? How does the Walrus and BNN deal with fake news? Merci, thank you.
Yeah, right on point. Tara, do you want to go first?
Sure. Well, I think in general, we don't report on fake news. Like the Walrus, we would be very careful in making sure that we have multiple sources on anything we report. And I think this is where there tends to be a bit of confusion in the general public, because there's so many different sites and so many different bits of information that people are getting now because of social media, that in general, I think they lose sight of where they can turn for legitimate news. And I can say as a journalist, we never put anything on air that we don't have confirmed multiple times, as I'm sure you guys don't as well. But it's hard sometimes when you're up against something like, say, Twitter or Facebook, where things are being posted faster than they're being checked. And so the misinformation that gets out there faster than you can fact check it is quite difficult. Yeah, no. So for us at the Walrus, and I have a little prop here, this is like our current issue. But we have the journalism in the print publication and also online at thewalrus.ca. So our focus is long form. So we're able to do the deeper dives, very different than a news environment, which you're working in a news environment
I've worked in, because in a news environment of daily news, right, is you have to really move quickly, and you have to confirm your sources, but also get the story out. We get to spend more time in those bigger pieces, like this cover stories, how to vaccinate 38 million people, right? So that's like a much bigger question and more word count to tell that story. But our fact-checking team, I've learned so much from them in regards to the work that they do. So, for example, in a story, if a writer says, this thing happened in my memory, right? Or I spoke to this person, or like all those sources get called, right? Like, did this happen, right? The writer said, this happened according to her memory. Like, did it happen? Did you say this? Did you? And that includes fact checking uncomfortable things, right? Like, obviously we have like a lot of tension in stories and in different perspectives. So at the Walrus, the fact checkers have big packages, right? Because they're fact checking all the details, all the sources, and sometimes have to be creative because not everyone's always available by a phone call, right? So it's an ongoing body of work, fact checking. I'm glad that we're more sensitive to it now because social media has increased the pressure and the competition to get the story right. What I find so fascinating about like this exact second that we're in with the US election is, so every network around the world, but especially the US networks and newspapers and radio stations, they want to get it. They want to be the first to call it, but they can't call it wrong. They can't call it wrong because then that's a business risk for them, but also like a risk to society and democracy. So much is on the line. So I have found now being at the Walrus, even in conversation, when I'm talking with friends, I'll say something and I'll think like, is that accurate or have I exaggerated? Like, it's like I'm kind of fact checking myself. Tara, do you ever find that like as a journalist where, even just with friends, you say something and then you're just like, I need to check that source. That's just from my memory.
Thankfully, we all have Google in our hand all the time now. It's very handy. What I've been also really interested in is the way in which media companies have stepped up a little bit when it comes to what you were talking about with the US president right now. And sometimes he will be speaking and say a very deliberate untruth. And they're calling him on it now, whereas they hadn't earlier in his presidency. And so I think it's put the media in a really awkward role as well.
Yeah, I mean, we've really never seen anything quite like Donald Trump. And I mean, there are journalists who've been covering politicians and politicians, and I say this, as a former political candidate, they're a unique beast because they're trained to not answer questions, right? They're trained not to give you the full story, right? And they're trained to stay on message and to campaign, right? Kind of like rock stars actually, who are trained to sell albums, right, and not really tell you too much. So that's very different than interviewing just like someone who's more of a regular person, right? Like, or someone who hasn't been through intense media screening and like years of being on camera. And then you have someone like Donald Trump, where basically CNN created a fact checker role for Daniel Dale, formerly of the Toronto Star. And that's just what he does, right? Is he goes through the claims, and he does it not just for Donald Trump, he did it for Joe Biden as well. And I'm sure we'll continue, we'll find out soon who gets to move forward in the new roles. But it's a new level and challenge right now in the current political climate, no doubt.
Yeah, I'm wondering if it's creating a whole new role for media in many ways too, to have to be a fact checker, because obviously this has opened up a whole new can of worms when we talk about politics and politicians moving forward.
Yeah, well, it also comes back to trust, right? So trust is something that's so important. The average person does not trust politicians, right? Media outlets, like I know for us at the Walrus, we have like very high brand trust, based on research that's been done. So it's something we take very seriously and we work very hard to ensure. But depending where you are in the world, not everyone trusts a journalist. Like, for example, I found when I was traveling throughout Africa, if I would say, crossing a border, I'm a journalist, like that might not go over so well, right? That might, because like, oh, am I going to be digging around? Like that might not go over so well. So the trust part is really important. And, I'll never forget, and in one of Michael Moore's, documentaries, there's this clip of Britney Spears saying like, I trusted the president. And like, you should be able to trust like your president or prime minister. You'd think like you should be able to trust, you know, the people in your life who we've been raised to look to, and that could be your priest or your boss. But we've lost trust in so many of these institutions right now. So I think people don't know where to turn, and hopefully, I mean, in our line of work, we want people to feel they can turn to our journalism, you know, as a point of reference.
What do you think we need to be doing better to allow that trust to come back?
Yeah, so I think transparency is a big part of it. I think that's one of the things I love about like this, right, of Google, is we really can figure out how things work, and we can learn more. And I mean, just because you Google something doesn't mean you have the correct fact, right? But there is more and more information available to us, and in this quick and easy way. And you know, I think it's really important, and I've been excited to see so many media outlets pulling the curtain back and just explaining how they do their work and how editorial decisions have been made. And you know, even this year, with the call for greater racial justice coming from Black Lives Matter, you know, Canadian media has been asked to, you know, revisit some of the policies that exist in newsrooms, and especially for Black, Indigenous, and racialized journalists, like, you know, how they're allowed to show up as a journalist, and do their work. So I think those conversations are vital, not just for the newsrooms, but for the larger public trust.
I could talk about this all day, but I've just remembered we haven't thrown yet to the second video by the Girl Guides of Canada, so we should get that question in right now.
Hello, my name is Bailey Doring, and I go to Western Canada High School. I am in the 39th Ranger Unit, which is a branch of Girl Guides. And today I'd like to ask you a question. And that question is, what is the most surprising discovery you've made at your job? Thank you, McWitch.
Do you want to take it first this time?
Wow. So I'm new, right? There's just like an incredible team at the Walrus, and we have an editorial team, we have an events team, we have a development team, we have the Walrus Lab. And so coming on, I started April 1st in the middle of COVID. And I have to say, I've been surprised to discover like how much can be done working from home. And coming from Twitter, where we were allowed to work from home, and I've worked virtually before, but it is like just really like incredible how much work can be done. Now, it doesn't mean like that it's the best working environment. And I think moving forward, everyone, but definitely the Walrus will embrace like a hybrid, right? A hybrid approach, both with COVID, but also just supporting people in their needs. But like, it's amazing that this gets out from people working across the country at home. Like I'm right now, like, there's my kitchen, hi, right? So like, that's pretty impressive.
It definitely is. I'd say in my life, the one thing that keeps coming back that I'm always surprised about is no matter how much older you get and how well you do in your career, you're never at the top of your game. Or maybe that's going back to that whole idea of what was that word that was earlier, where you don't believe in yourself enough.
Like the idea of what I call systemic failure, but you say imposter syndrome. Yeah.
So just the idea that nobody ever knows fully what they're doing, and everyone's just trying to do their best all the time. And honestly, that's where some of the best products come from, is that ingenuity of trying to figure it out, and often figure it out from ground zero every single day. And I find that really interesting, because I think when you're younger, you always think most people have the answers, and you know what, they don't. Well,
it's funny you say that, Chara, because a few friends of mine have said to me, including men, right, that they're often like, I'm just making this up. Well, we're all just making it up. Like that's what work is, right? We're all creating it and doing it and trying it and seeing what works. And you do think when you get older, I know Michelle Obama talks about this in her memoir, which is like, you know, she's been in the room with some of the like smartest people in the world, and she's like, meh, they're not that impressive, right? So there is, yeah, I agree with you. There's not this one moment where you're like, I have arrived and I know it all, or like, oh, like it's constant learning, right? It's always, we're human beings, we're a work in progress.
Well, this leads into one of the final questions here. Who are your female heroes?
Yeah, like it's funny because like hero is like such a big word. I mean, definitely growing up, Oprah Winfrey was everything to me, you know, as someone who wanted to work in television. I also grew up in the era of like just these talk shows, right? Like you could watch talk shows after hour after coming home from school. And I think, with Oprah, she was a real leader in her field because she moved away from the sensationalism and took a talk show and did everything from building a book club to breaking through taboo topics to inspiring people, right? Really to live their best life. And now it's gone on to do like so many other things, and including embracing like all the new technology, right? Like it's like she has a magazine, but she's also, on social media and on, Apple News. So she's a big one. But I think, the other piece for me is really being inspired by the people around me. And that includes the people I work with at the Walrus. It includes, my mom, my family, and I'm part of a crew of women journalists called Media Girlfriends. It was founded by Nanaba Duncan, and for me, it's like the heroes are right around me, right, doing their work, and I'm constantly inspired by that. I'm curious, Tara, what about you?
You know what? I love the idea of Oprah. That's not when that would have come to mind for me, but you're right. What a trailblazer. And as a female, a multi-millionaire trailblazer too. Yeah. But I think in general, I'd have to say even who the Famous Five spoke to last week, Ronna Ambrose, just women who are paving the way, that are doing amazing things, that are opening doors to the rest of us. I'd say all of them. And there's so many as well. Maybe Kamala Harris is the new VP in the US, and and the New Zealand premier as well. Just so many. And,
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, sorry. But I guess I should ask you, what are your dreams for the future for young girls and women in Canada?
Yeah, I mean, it's, I have to say, like, I've been very moved by Me Too and the work that continues from that movement. Constantly inspired by Black Lives Matter. I think there's so much change underway, and we also see the resistance and the pushback to that change. And in many ways, the bar is high, but the bar is low. So, I want women and non-binary folks in this country to live a life that's violence-free, right? And that's actually so far away. So this is where it's like, where is the bar, right? It's like, I want pay equity and I want women in positions of power in the boardroom, in office. But then really just coming back to basics is like, I want women and trans folks to feel safe in society, right? And that's something, especially with COVID this year, I know people are struggling with.
Well, right before I introduce Frances right back in, I want to also ask you, if you belong to a group like the Famous Five today, you did mention a number of these issues, but what do you think would be the big issue that group would be championing?
Yeah, I love that idea. So I will say, if I was a journalist, it'd be incredible to embed in the Famous Five. That would wow, imagine that story. But I think thinking of Famous Five and also what they were fighting for, I would pick proportional representation. Because in Canada as well, not just in the US, people vote and they feel like their vote goes nowhere, whereas we could actually change the system. I mean, you mentioned New Zealand. That's a good example of people want to look to a different voting system where actually the vote would be represented, right? So the proportion of the vote of the party that you voted for, the local candidate that you voted for, would actually be represented in government. We can do that with proportional representation. So I think that would be the game changer. And we see that proportional representation leads to greater diversity in government.
Wonderful. All right, Frances Wright, I'd love to have you come back in and join us because I understand you have some questions as well.
I do. But first of all, I want to say thank you very much to Tara and to Jenn for this illuminating discussion. I've got probably 10 questions, but I have to limit them, of course, to one or two. And I guess my first question would be to the two of you, what gives you the courage to be a leader? Tara?
Wow, that's a big question. I guess I don't see myself as courageous. I just see myself as doing my job and pushing the limits that I have to do every day to do the job I do. I think in general, I don't know if most people here would know this, but I use a wheelchair. And I think that was one of the things right away that when I had my accident, I always felt the need to prove myself and push myself because there were so many other people that had put expectations on me that were lower than what I had for myself. And so I'd say that's what led me to essentially push those doors open.
Thank you. And Jen, you mentioned earlier that you like the idea of claiming space in the male-dominated spheres. What gives you the courage to say that and do that?
Yeah, well, I think for me, like one of my first memories of actively doing that, I joined the high school ski club. A friend of mine's like, "You want to join ski club?" I'm like, "Okay." And my mom's like, "Yeah, I want to take your money you're making at Arby's to pay for it." I'm like, "Yeah, sure." So saved up, joined ski club, and then snowboarding had come on as this new sport. This is the 90s. And it seemed very cool to me, but I only saw guys doing it. I only saw guys doing it on the hill. And I turned to another friend and said, "I think we should learn to snowboard. I'm not seeing any girls doing it." And she was like, "Yeah," "Yeah, let's do it." And so we did. We got snowboards and we took lessons. We actually felt very welcome. Like guys were like, "Yes, please come." Like we want you in the space. So now, seeing like everyone snowboarding, like all ages, men, women, it's still a very male dominated sport in terms of like who's pro and where the money's spent. But I snowboard with 2 young girls, my friends' daughters. That makes me so happy because that wasn't the case. So to me, it's part of a challenge. Like I'm kind of like, "Ooh, let's do it." But I also think that's how you change the spaces by showing up. And Tara, a friend of mine, was saying that she's in a wheelchair, and one of the things is when you come in, you do claim more space, right? Like that you naturally that comes with it. And I think it's important we claim as much space as possible.
Yeah. And Tara, I'm thinking about your comment saying you don't see yourself as a leader, but clearly you are. For example, what Jen has just said, but also for the fact that you talk openly about the obstacles that you have and how you've overcome them. And that's wonderful because you're serving as a role model, and role models are so important to girls and to women. A number of studies have said that 6 out of 10 girls and women do not call themselves leaders, and they do not think they will ever become leaders. But other studies then show that 85% of women change their opinion once they've seen a female leader in action. So both of you are really, really important leaders. And going back to the whole idea of you being journalists, what is the glass ceiling for you? Are you aspiring to become the management, as Jen is somewhat in with the Walrus, but are either of you aspiring to own media? What is the glass ceiling? What do you want to break? Jen?
Yeah, you know what? I love, Francis, how you're just like, right, you're pushing up, because I think one of the hard things about systems and systemic change is it's the air around us. It's the water that we swim in. And so even I love how I'm like, "What are you talking about?" Then you're like, owning. I'm like, owning. Wow. Okay. Like, but these are the questions I think it's really important that we look at. So you might open a newspaper or turn on the TV and be like, "Yeah, there's lots of women." Just like actually start counting, like how many women are in the op-ed pages. Like actually, like it's not even close to 50-50. Or it's like how many women are actually like in leadership roles, like at media companies. And it's changing more and more, but it's more likely to be a woman like me, a white woman, right? So, and then when you look at like ownership of media, like this comes back to a very current and historically male dominated space. So that's not my plan, but I have to say, I like that you're asking that question. And Tara, I'm curious your response to that.
Yeah,
I think Tara, you be the owner of the media.
Okay, I'll just take that on, no big deal. But I think it is really interesting. I'd have to say media in general, though, I think is fairly equitable between the genders. But you're right, as a white woman, that is easier to say. But when we look at things in terms of ownership and board and representation, that's somewhere where we don't often see that same kind of representation. But throughout the other parts of the ranks, that's fair. And I think that's something that really needs to be expanded to other industries. So when I say media is good, it's good for what it is. We're just not there yet, but we're still miles ahead of where we are when we look at, say, the oil and gas industry or other types of sectors that don't have that same kind of representation. So I bring it back personally. I hadn't really thought about owning a major conglomerate, but you know what? Why not?
Why not? Exactly. And now a technical question. I think it was you, Jen, who mentioned that when you're on social media and you see hate speech or something that's equally deplorable, you can report it. Please tell me how specifically one would do this.
Yeah, absolutely. And Francis, I think that's really important because the social media platforms have actually introduced a lot of new features on how you can report anything that violates their rules, their policies, their terms of service. But I don't think everyone knows. I don't think they promoted it enough, and they also haven't promoted enough within the app. But basically, all the major platforms, if you see something, I would say if it's obvious, if you're like, yeah, that violates it. Usually within the post, you can click on, definitely in Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and within the post, you can click on a drop down that will allow you to report. And it can be anything from like someone has stolen identity, right? Like, because that's a common one that happens, right? Someone's pretending to be someone in an organization that they're not. It could be hate or abuse. It could also be sensitive content, right? And there's a lot of stuff that falls under that, and that can be in a breaking news environment, but also something that is violence, etc. So you can report it within. I also encourage people to read the policies of the social media companies, and you can find them. Twitter, it's called the rules, because I think people might be surprised to even just see where the policies are, both in good ways where they're like, wow, I didn't know, or like, that's interesting, that's not covered, and just to get a sense on because once you report it, doesn't mean it will be actioned. It means it will be reviewed up against the policies.
Sorry, so just a little further clarification. When you do the drop down, does it give you specific categories that you're objecting to, or do you have to write in and say, this is hate speech, or take it off? What do you do?
We'll walk you through a series of options where you can identify like what it is. So for example, let's take something that could happen where, let's say you don't like what someone's saying, right? Like, I don't like that. That's offensive to me, but it actually doesn't violate the policy, right? It's just something like, Jennifer Hollett's an idiot. I'm like, I don't like that, right? So I would go in and would say like, is it this? Is it? And it's like, well, actually, it's technically not violating any, but so sometimes you end up checking and it's like, thanks for letting us know this doesn't violate our policy, right? You might go down. Whereas another one would say like, is this targeting you? Is it targeting someone else? Is it targeting someone based on this criteria? Is this video that needs to be reviewed? Is this a copyright ownership issue? There's even that. So yeah, we'll take you through the options.
I see. Wow. Thank you for that further encouragement to be active, to be participants, to be leaders in our lives, and not just followers or consumers or irrelevant. So I thank the two of you very much. As I say, I've got about 10 more questions for you, which maybe we'll take offline. But your conversation today, I'm sure, helped a lot of people understand the media better. And without a doubt, you've shown what female leadership can be. It's all different kinds, and it's different types at different situations, whatever. So I thank you both very, very much for participating today and sharing your lives and being an inspiration to those of us who aren't you. So keep being you and keep building a better Canada. So I thank you very much. Now,
thank you.
We're going to just take a minute now to talk about 5 news items for the Famous 5. And these are items that are full of gratitude today. And so I'm hoping that you will have, besides you, easily accessible your teacup or your glass or your mug to bring a toast to 5 fascinating and worthy individuals. The first one is to Alanis Morissette. Earlier this year, before COVID started, her play on Broadway called Jagged Little Pill opened. And recently, the play received 15 Tony nominations. Now, normally the award is given out much before this, but again, because of COVID, it's going to be announced a little bit later. So I would ask you to please raise a glass and toast to Alanis Morissette. Alanis Morissette, and maybe 10 or 5 Tony Awards. Yay for Alanis. Now, our second tribute is also to an amazing woman with the name Alanis. But this time it's to a remarkable Indigenous storyteller, a filmmaker, an advocate for women, an advocate for Indigenous peoples, and that's Alanis Obomsawin. Glenn Gould, as many of you know, was an extraordinary pianist, but in his spirit, the Glenn Gould Awards have been established to honor a lifetime achievement by an artist in recognition that their art has impacted beyond the artistic realm. And that certainly is true for Alanis Obopsawin. So I would ask you again to raise a toast to Alanis, to Alanis. And then earlier, someone, I'm not sure whether it was Tara or Jenn, mentioned the Prime Minister of New Zealand, who has just won re-election. And her name is Jacinda Ardern. And I would ask you again, raise your teacup, a toast to the new Prime Minister of New Zealand. So my fourth toast, who's my fourth toast to? Well, I think even though the votes aren't in, and I can hardly wait until it becomes formally the next Vice President of the United States of America. And she's particularly important to Canadians because for 4 years, she attended Westmount Junior and Senior High School in Montreal. So we have a quasi-Canadian becoming the next Vice President of the United States. So to the remarkable Kamala Harris. To Kamala Harris. And in light of us women, we women, not always recognizing ourselves as leaders, I would like us to make a toast to us, to we leaders, to we women, to myself. I am a leader. I would like you to say a toast to me. I'm a leader too. A toast to me. I'm a leader too. Well, thank you. So this concludes our formal program. I'm very grateful to Jennifer and to Tara for their fascinating conversation, and also to Riley and Bailey, who asked very probing questions and did that so beautifully. So thanks to them as well. And of course to Enbridge and to Gina for their support over the many years. And now it's time to ask you, to remind you to please come back on December the 4th. That's our next Famous Five Friday. And we will be featuring Dr. Nadine Caron. She is the first and only Indigenous female surgeon in Canada. And she's featured in a new book by Peter Mansbridge called Extraordinary Canadians. And so it will be released in the next couple of days. And I think you'll find that conversation equally fascinating. And last but not least, we have a pledge at the Famous Five Foundation that's based on a passage in Emily Murphy's book. And it goes, I feel equal to high and splendid braveries. And so as women leaders, put your shoulders back, take a deep breath. And I want us to say this phrase so that you can immediately recall it when you're in a situation, when you're asking for a raise or when you're leaving an abusive relationship or speaking out on an issue. You'll say this, I feel equal. So I'm going to say it first and ask you to repeat. I feel equal to high and splendid braveries. Okay. So let's say it together. I feel equal to high and splendid braveries. Shoulders back. Deep breath in and out. I'm counting down to 5, and then it's over to you to make your pledge. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Excellent. Thank you. And now to conclude our program, we've invited back a remarkable artist, a songwriter, who's preparing a musical theater tribute to the Famous Five. Her name is Brianna Burt. She's from Saskatoon, and she's going to sing about determination and dedication. Again, thank you to everybody for today. Merci, miigwech.
Hi, I'm Brianna Burt. I'm from Saskatoon, and I wrote a musical about the Famous Five. I'm going to sing for you. I'm going to do a one-woman show here, a song that Emily Murphy sings in the musical. It's called Dedication, Determination. And of course, Emily would have had to have had a tremendous amount of dedication and determination to put forward the person's case. And I hope this inspires others to persevere and reach their goals. So here's dedication, determination.
You wanna make a change and live your life. You wanna make a name, not just be Mr.'s wife. You'll need some dedication, determination. You gotta keep your chin up, get some thicker skin. You gotta open doors where you don't fit in. It's your dedication, determination. No one's gonna lift you up to tell you you are a star. You better hustle, baby, if you wanna go far. So you work your butt off, you can raise the bar. Come on now, dedication, determination. You wanna get somewhere in your career. You wanna share your voice, make it loud and clear. It's about dedication, determination. You gotta get to school and don't be late. You gotta do your homework and concentrate. Come on now, dedication, determination. Maybe it will be an uphill battle. You might slip and fall. Keep your head up high, 'cause it don't matter at all. Gotta keep believing, stand up nice and tall. Come on now, dedication, determination. You wanna get the vote, you gotta dress the part. You'll need to sew a dress, we ain't got it Walmart. Come on now, dedication, determination. Then we can show the men we know what we're worth. Women are just like them, but we can also give birth. Come on now, dedication, determination. You don't need to be a girly girl, and you don't need to flirt. They don't make it easy for us girls in a skirt. You can say it loud or be an introvert. Come on now, dedication, determination. Dedication, determination.